Disclosure. This might be the longest video that I put out on my YouTube channel to date because I have a lot to say on this topic, but it in no way, shape, or form makes me an expert. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Little Miss Funeral YouTube channel. I'm so excited to have you all here. It has been a good month since I last put out a video, and I know that's because I have been just so busy at the funeral home. With work and with being a funeral director, that's obviously my first priority. So when I come home, sometimes it's just late or I'm exhausted and I don't have time to film a video. So since I had a little time to film a video today, I thought there was no better topic to start myself back into YouTube than compassion fatigue syndrome. Compassion fatigue syndrome, for lack of a better description, is basically going to be when a person who is helping somebody in a very stressful setting also gets stress added onto them from helping that person. So when you Google compassion fatigue syndrome, EMTs, nurses, firefighters, different occupations like that come up so much for suffering from compassion fatigue. But funeral directors and morticians rarely come up, and I think that the only way to change that is to be open to talk about our own stories and our own journeys so that we can educate others for what we go through and to be able to develop resources to help funeral professionals out there. So to give you all a little bit of background on myself, if you do not read my blog, Little Miss Funeral, I touch upon my depression and my past quite a lot on there. I have no problems writing about my emotions and what I'm going through, but talking about it is a little bit different for me, so forgive me if this video is, I don't know, just different, because like I said, I have no problem writing about it. It's so easy for me to write down what I'm feeling, but it's so difficult for me to actually verbalize it, I guess. I started working full-time in a funeral home when I was 20 years old. I had met a wonderful funeral director who honestly gave me a chance when I had basically no experience other than what I had learned in mortuary school. And he hired me after meeting me one time. At first, I was so excited to learn and so excited to prove myself because I was young and a female working in traditionally a male-dominated industry, so I just felt like I had a lot to learn and a lot to prove of myself to be taken seriously by others out there. And I just submerged myself completely in everything. I was working long hours. I was working like 50 to 60 hours a week at times, arriving at work before the sun would rise to work funerals, and I would leave the funeral home long after the sun set because I would close up after visitations and calling hours. This funeral firm that I worked for had a relatively small staff, so everybody basically did everything. Once you received a death call, you know, you would go out, and I mean, I would go out and pick up the person from where they passed away, bring them back to the funeral home, embalm them, and meet with the families, work the entire calling hours, work the entire visitations. Basically, we were very hands-on, which was awesome because you really got to make connections with these families and be there for them every step of the way. But on the other end, you really had no work-home life balance because you dedicated yourself completely to the funeral home. And for quite a long time, that was okay with me. And for that period of time, I think that the high that I got from learning a new trade and absorbing everything that I could about the funeral industry overpowered how tiring and overwhelming this job is and can be if you don't properly take care of yourself. So for 3 years, I had worked for this funeral home, and for 3 years, basically, that was my life. I would get up and go to work and be at work all day and be around death and grieving families. And by the time I would come home at night, I'd maybe eat something very quickly, fall asleep, only to wake up and do it all again the very next day. It was hard, and over time, that high that I received from learning a new trade began to wear off, and the exhaustion and the lack of balance in my life started to pile on, and over time it just became a lot, especially because I was so young. I was 23 when I stopped working at that funeral home. So from 20 to 23, those were years where friends that I had were in college and they were out living a completely different lifestyle and finding out who they were as people and partying and just being young 20-something-year-olds. And I was living a completely different life of something that I had chosen and I had wanted to do for so long, but it's completely different reading about it or learning about it and then actually going through it. Over time, just being constantly at work and being constantly surrounded by people and that grief and that sadness, it began to weigh on me. I was good at what I did, and my boss knew that, so more responsibility ended up getting put on my shoulders as I came out of my residency and became a fully licensed funeral director. I would meet with more families. I think that a lot of the families I worked with liked working with me because I didn't look like your typical funeral director. I mean, right? Look at me, but I just think that a lot of people felt comfortable around me. And I love talking with people, and I love learning about their lives, and I love helping people, and I think that they could read that when they were with me. So a lot more responsibility was put on my shoulders at the funeral home, on top of what I had already been doing, which was basically everything. Every employee there did everything together, but it was just a lot. So over time, I noticed my attitude changing, and like anything, it doesn't happen overnight, but I don't think that I fully understood what was happening to me until I was so far down in this hole of depression that all of a sudden I looked up and I thought, what am I doing here? And why am I so unhappy? It just became so much for me to handle, both physically and mentally, where I knew if I did not leave the funeral home that I would have to leave the funeral profession for good. I got to the point where I was so burned out, and I had no compassion for any of the families that I was serving. My hand shook anytime I would go to answer the phone because I was so scared that it was going to be a death call. And when I had to actually sit down and make arrangements with families, I would have to pep talk myself, but I just had lost that love for the funeral profession that I carried in my heart for so long, and I wasn't myself. When you're in depression, you are so clouded by all of this negative emotion and indifference, and just, it's so hard to explain it because I wasn't myself anymore. I mean, that's the best way to say it. I was miserable and tired and lacked motivation, and I didn't know what to do. So it just got to that point where I quit because I felt as if I had no other options. I did end up getting a job with a different funeral firm where basically my job duty was cut in half. So instead of doing all of the transfers and embalmings and arrangements and funerals and visitations, basically instead of doing an entire funeral from start to finish with this new funeral home, it was just going to be my job description to do arrangement conferences and funerals and visitations. So I was cutting my workload in half because I was taking away basically all of the preparation work that I was doing before. So that was kind of, after a little, like maybe a 2-week break, that was kind of my reintroduction back into the funeral industry, to see if it was just maybe this funeral firm that was causing my compassion fatigue syndrome, even though that doesn't make sense. But what was it, the funeral firm, or was it the funeral profession altogether? And I can definitely say that it wasn't the funeral firm that was causing my compassion fatigue syndrome, because it was the long hours and the families and the death and dying that was really weighing on me. But by taking myself out of that environment and putting myself in a new environment, even though it was still within the funeral service industry, it really did help me out a ton. The thing is that I was able to do some research on my own and discover this title of compassion fatigue syndrome and learn a little bit about it to understand that this is something that I had struggled with. And if I had had resources or the knowledge about compassion fatigue while I was going through it at that funeral home, there is a very good chance that I would still be working over there, because I would have understood the symptoms that I was going through and I would have been able to address it. One of my personal issues is not taking care of myself. I will put myself on the bottom of the totem pole in order to help anybody else. I put the families that I serve at the funeral home and my family at home above my own health. And that was something that I had to learn how to deal with when I discovered that I was suffering from compassion fatigue. Was I had to learn how to be selfish, and I had to learn to tell others, I need to take a break right now because this is becoming too much and too heavy for me to handle. I have to have a day off, because if I don't, I am going to burn out and I am not going to be any sort of help to anybody. So that was something that I definitely struggled with, and I still struggle with to this day, because as a funeral director, I hate saying no. I hate saying that I cannot do something. It is my job to make a difficult time easier, and when I can't make my own difficult journey easier, I feel as if I'm letting myself down. So it's a constant struggle, but the good news is that I have learned more about this. I have learned how to better take care of myself and to eat healthier and to do some sort of exercise and to make time for my own family and my own mental health, so that I can just get myself out of that downward spiral when I can now see myself going down that downward spiral. I feel that a huge thing is knowing what you are going through and knowing the name of it so that you can better address it. Because I know that I suffered from compassion fatigue syndrome and that I am susceptible to experience it because of the nature of my job, I can better prepare myself and take care of myself now. So a year ago, I was actually giving a presentation at the Ohio Funeral Director Convention on compassion fatigue, and I had somebody by the name of Dr. Jason Schroyer reached out to me after that presentation, and he basically had said how he sees a need for resources for funeral professionals. He really has been amazing and this huge driving force to creating this program called Finding Resilience. Finding Resilience is this program that was designed by Dr. Jason Schroyer to help funeral professionals and to be that resource that we are severely lacking. So you can actually go on to the Homesteaders Life Company website and request this information. I will put it in the description box below, and you can get this burnout prevention program. There I am. I'm featured throughout this a couple of different times, but it's just a really, I mean, honestly, to go through this, it's gonna just take you a very short period of time, but it's such good common sense information. And I feel that one huge thing with depression is when you are in it, you are lacking that common sense because you are in such a fog that you just can't process things and think as clearly as you would typically be able to do so. So it is just a really, really good resource. The first step is to just talk about it, share our stories, let others out there know that this is something that is common. This is something that is not frowned upon. You should not feel bad for dealing with depression or compassion fatigue. And just know that if you are struggling with this career and if you are going through some dark times because you are trying to be in a profession where you are helping others, that you are not alone. We have to be there to help one another, and we have to be selfish, because if we cannot help ourselves, we cannot help other people. If you are a part of the funeral profession, you are a part of this little club, and the best way to get through something is to be able to lean on the support of others. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about this topic. Thank you so much in advance if you do choose to read any of the posts that I have linked in the description bar below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.